Welcome to episode 27.
Hey, this is John Lee Dumas of EO Fire, and you're listening to Who Did That Voice, where we take an in-depth look at voiceovers.
The holiday season is upon us, and there is no time like the present to book your holiday getaway with 3D Travel Company. Whether you want to set sail on the high seas or visit exotic and foreign locales, maybe your dream is to see a magical mouse, or maybe you long for a getaway that will universally appeal to all. For a limited time, my listeners receive a Disney gift card with qualifying Disney vacation purchases booked and traveled by the end of 2016. For more information on booking any of these trips, go to 3dtravelcompany.com and tell them Trenton sent you.
Merry Christmas and welcome to Who Did That Voice, the show where we take an in-depth look at voiceover. And now, here's your host, Trenton Larkin.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the show. Today's special guest comes all the way from Mega Cat City, used to work for the Enforcers, loves working in a junkyard, and is fond of fighter jets. Welcome T-Bone to the show.
Switching to auxiliary weapons panel. This is for you, Razor. Guide my hand, sure shot. Dark Cat, I am taking you down. Say good night, Dark Cat!
Back off, SWAT Cat! The Enforcers will handle this!
You back off, Feral! It's my tag!
Another character our special guest has gotten to play is Blue, furry, and loves carrots. Welcome Buster Bunny to the show from Tiny Toon Adventures.
Feel Parmigiana, feel Parmigiana. Babs, that song really put me in the mood. For what? Pizza. You got any money? Thank you, Mr. Romance.
Today's special guest is very fond of both beef and chicken because he played both cow and chicken on the Cow and Chicken Show.
Enhanced School of Kuwait. Kick Heine or your money back.
What are you doing here, cow? Kicking butt ain't for women.
Oh, at least the crabs. Dvorak, watch. He is not a woman.
All right, okay, you can tag along, but I do not want to know you are here.
Sadly, this amazing guest has done so many voices we can't touch them all, but the last one I'm going to share with you today is all the way from Agrabah. Please welcome Mechanicles from Aladdin, the animated series.
Greetings, meddlesome strangers. I am Mechanicles, the greatest of the great Greek geniuses. Archimedes, an amateur. Socrates, talk. To make a long story short, I plan on taking over the world.
Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Who Did That Voice? Today on the show we have the legendary Charlie Adler. Charlie, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me today, this bright and early Saturday morning.
Yes, sir, it is. Well, Charlie, the very first thing we always like to start off with is just to get kind of a background on who our guest is on the show. Would you please tell my listeners, who is Charlie Adler and how did you break into the voiceover industry?
Well, I'll start by saying that I don't consider the voiceover industry separate from the acting industry or being an artist of any kind. So the premise from which I work is that I am a trained actor. I grew up in the theater. I grew up in New York. I did commercials. I did Broadway. I did off-Broadway. I did off-Broadway. I did improv companies. I was in national tours. I did summer stock. I did community theater, high school, elementary school plays. So for me, before I did my first, quote, voiceover, I was working as an actor and developing characters just by the mere fact that I was working. So when I got my very first voiceover gig for animation, which was the My Little Pony special, which was in New York, I think it was maybe 1983, I'm not quite sure about the dates, but I had already done and was very prolific in doing radio commercials and television commercials, which in New York in the 70s, which is what I'm referring to, was just part of a daily routine of being an actor. I would wake up, I would go to a class, I would go to an audition, then if I was lucky enough to be in a long run of a show, I'd go to the theater. I'd come from maybe shooting a commercial directly to the theater to do the play. I'd go out and sing in a club at night. and go home and start all over again. And so I was called, and we were all called actors. There was no distinction. Actors in New York went from medium to medium. Every now and again I'd get flown out to the West Coast for a screen test for series, and there were many, many levels to having a career. It wasn't until I moved here to Los Angeles, I think it was 84, I'm not quite sure of that either, that there were these labels placed, and the word that you used, industry. So I still fight that. And in my own opinion, I'm still an actor and have always been an actor and will always be an actor no matter what the label is. And so I urge anybody out there who is very interested and wanting very much to do any part of the industry, if it's just solely voiceover, you still have to be an accomplished actor. And now that I'm a director as well, the people that I gravitate to that work the best in this medium have theater backgrounds, acting backgrounds, improv backgrounds, sketch comedy backgrounds. And to me, it's just one long day of a career. So was that the longest answer you ever heard in your damn life?
Hey, it's absolutely fine because, getting that perspective from you, being an actor and being a director, you have that understanding that, I or my listeners might not have had prior. So I appreciate you sharing that in-depth answer with us.
Well, good, because I won't give you yes or no and the sky is blue answers.
Well, speaking of theater, I've been in theater since I was a little kid, and I know how important acting is when it comes to creating characters and such, whether it's on screen or off screen or, like you were saying with voiceover, and how you consider it just all one thing. Because if you're an actor, and it's just how are you using those acting skills in the world of media. So.
I agree, Trent, because I think the only real question is once you've done the theater, you know how to modulate a performance, and once you are able to go from that to a movie set or a TV set or in front of a microphone, the only real differences are technical, is what is the actual medium that you're working in. So with film or television, it's very quiet, very still, very interior, but it's a different kind of acting, but acting in a more condensed, confined way. It's very, very still. So if you have the skill to act, all you really have to do is learn the confines of the medium and the restraints, the constraints and the lack of constraints from medium to medium. For instance, animation is as big in many, many ways for the high character stuff as I liken it to doing children's theater character work or improv sketch comedy. You're allowed to go very, very big. Now with the advent of interactive games and mocap, it's become very cinematic. And so, there are different amendments to that. You're no longer just being wild and playful and comedic, but now there are a lot of great uses for great acting in a different way. Although I think comedy is extraordinarily harder, much harder than serious straight acting. It's much easier to make somebody cry over somebody or something that has died or a scene or a setup. But comedy is an extraordinarily fine-tuned art, in my opinion. Not that the other isn't, but it's just my making a comparison for comparison's sake.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, Charlie, you briefly mentioned being on My Little Pony as your first animation, and you were cast as Spike, the little dragon. And what was it like working with that group initially and then coming back, once the series really took off a couple of years later?
Well, it was really kind of odd. I mean, it's a great question because it was the launch for me. I got that. It was Sunbow Productions who was centered at that time, I believe, in California. Why they did it in New York, I'm not quite sure. But Tony Randall and Sandy Duncan were the then stars of the special, and it was just a whole exciting new way of working, which I had to learn pretty quick. But again, because I did so much sketch comedy and so much improv, it wasn't really a stretch at all. I really fell into it. Weirdly, I finished that, and then I'd done a show on Broadway, and I left that company to go do the national tour of the very same show. And they did the second special, and I was at that time in Philadelphia. And my dark day, I think I got on the train the last show of the week, and I got a train from Philly to New York. It was like 90 minutes. Checked into a hotel, woke up the next morning, and did the second special, and totally forgot about it. The tour closes. I moved to L.A., I don't have a thought in my head about voiceover animation. This is the furthest thing from my mind. I'll save you. It's too long a story, but I ended up at Hanna-Barbera at a general audition. I ended up booking Smurfs as my very first animated show, which was utterly thrilling. The Hanna-Barbera years were just amazing event in my life. And weirdly, very close to that, maybe a year into it, Ginny McSwain, who had been my first voiceover agent with Arlene Thornton, left the agency and went back to work in animation direction. And she got that series, and they wanted the original Spike. So I didn't have to audition for the series, but what I did have to do, because contractually SAG allowed 3 voices per contract. So I auditioned for the replacement of both Danny DeVito and Tony Randall, which I believe we had done a feature maybe in between. And I got those parts. So I was Spike. I think it was called The Grundle King and Moochik. Moochik, that was it. Tony Randall was Moochik. So I ended up playing 3 parts on the series, and we did 65 of them. Then syndication, they'd have a buy for 65 episodes. Unbelievable. And I did that. So it was just sort of this strange happenstance, right place, right time, perfect that I was in L.A., and how lucky was I?
Well, it's great that you were able to return to the series, because I know that has become a long-standing, very hardcore fan-followed show. And I know I grew up with it too. So, I know I've got friends that are way more hardcore into it than I am, but it has become a show that has had a huge following, and you were a part of that show. So,
well, you're telling me something that I honestly don't know. This is what I do know. Thank you. It's nice to know that. I think the new incarnation has the following. I had no clue or idea that anybody cared at all about My Little Pony, the original series, and I didn't even know it was on or anybody saw it.
yeah.
I mean, y'all are so young, and I'm this old fart, and I'm kind of going, what are they talking about? So I don't get invited to the My Little Pony conventions. I don't sit and sign things for that. It's the new. I'm not saying this with any unhappiness. I'm just saying there doesn't seem to be the following that the new generation has generated, which is wonderful. It's wonderful for Tara Strong and people, the new generation of the pony set. But I don't feel included in that, and it's very interesting to me that you just said that people follow it. Okay, great. That's nice. That's really nice.
Well, absolutely, Charlie. Well, another show that you have been a part of that has become a national phenomenon in movies and in animation is Transformers. Back in 1984, when you first played in Transformers, their Generation 1, you played a character named Silverbolt. Do you remember him?
Right. I do. And that was a very strange experience because it was so not high comedy character work, and it was very militaristic. And I walked into a room of men who were standing with their fists on their hip, with their chests inflated, barking out things. And director Wally Burr, who had actually been in the military, who was very militaristic in his direction, who, by the way, really was so loyal to me over the years. I did Gem. I did, I think, 78 episodes of Gem for him as Eric Raymond and Tech Rat and Zipper, and I was in G.I. Joe, and I did so much work for Wally. But the Transformers and G.I. Joe, first generation, were so shocking to me. It was just, what are they doing? What is it? But I just took to it, and I loved it. I loved the room, and I think Robbie Paulson was. I think we were on that together. I can't quite. I always sound like an idiot, and I don't mean to say I've done so much I don't remember. But it all just sort of blends into one day, and I don't really hold on to the past much. I just I work really hard when I'm in it, but the minute it's over, I get in my car, and it takes me like, if I go out to dinner and with people, what did you do? I honestly don't remember.
I understand.
And that's that day we're talking about. So, you're reminding me of many things, which they're nice memories if I can just pull them out of my dead brain.
Well, I don't consider it a dead brain. I consider it a very active brain who's done so much that it's just hard to keep a track of everything you've absolutely done, especially, 30, 40 years ago. So
it's 34 years. You had to say it, didn't you? 34 years! Oh, my Lord. Going on 35. Going on 35, dude. What
Yeah.
the?
Well, speaking of Wally Burr, he actually was a tank commander, and so that's kind of why he was militaristic in his teachings and stuff as a director. But I mean, he was amazing. He's done, so many of the original classic shows that people fell in love with, and his style was just very unique.
It really was, and he gave line readings, which irritated all of us. But we all really loved Wally. But I got to tell you something. The way the studio was set up, it was his own recording studio. It was a long, very narrow room. And so looking into the booth, it was a long, very narrow window that accommodated producers, writers, and, of course, Wally directing from the helm. And we were every cast of every show I mentioned, we behaved so badly. We were such rotten children that we would have to duck under the sight line. And what went on out of his sight line on the floor, if I had ever filmed that, we'd all be in jail.
So some wild stories.
We were terrible children, terrible misbehaved children. It was great.
Well, Charlie, what was it like coming back all those years later when they asked you to play Starscream in the live-action Michael Bay films?
I was really thrilled. I mean, I was really, really thrilled, and it was a very different way of working because instead of us doing the radio play that they would animate to, which is what the series had been originally, I had come in to about a three-quarter computer-generated scenes that I was voicing to. So I was matching picture while creating this insanity on the fly and working with Michael Bay, who was absolutely wonderful. He was so collaborative and so playful and so spontaneous. And, he'd say, well, what if he said this? And a really good sense of humor. He would always come up with these really great alternative lines. And his AD was terrific too, and we worked really. It was a great experience. I mean, it was a terrific experience, very unexpected. So I loved that, and I think I did three of them. I think I did three of them.
Yes, you did.
And I think the third one, I said, Michael, you just killed me. What the hell? You just killed me. He said, your wires and computer chips will bring you back. Well, he didn't. But I consider myself very lucky to have done the three for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that show, those movies being based off of the original animation, it was fascinating to finally see a live action show for that, because I know Transformers growing up for me was huge, and it's huge for a lot of people.
And when we would keep redoing things, months would go by to win again. They would tweak a scene or redo something. But each time I went in, there was more art to look at. And I can remember standing at an edit bay waiting, and I actually walked right up to the screen, very, very close. I could not believe the detail that those brilliant artists had thrown into. We look at a scene in total, but then when I saw the fine detail and the most interesting components to each character that was all computer generated, and then the mastery of putting it, in real, that whole scene in Egypt. I mean, they really were in Egypt. This was It was amazing. They went to such great lengths, and that's astonishing to me.
With using the real sets and then bringing the characters into it, it was stunning, absolutely stunning.
I agree. I mean, and I don't. It's not really my genre. I don't really get into the bang bang shoot 'em up stuff. I'm more, I'm still watching black and whites from the 30s.
Hey,
so
classics, man.
I have a very low learning curve. Huh?
I said the classics. Those are the classics.
Those are the classics. And by the way, I'm going in to teach an all-day seminar, acting seminar, and I always say, which I will say today, so I'm going to say this to your listening audience: if you were a painter or a sculptor, you would have no problem, and it would never occur to you to not go to a museum. You would know every artist that came before you, or a good many of artists who came before you. There's something about acting where people just go, oh, it all starts with me. It doesn't start with you. Those classic films have so much to offer about style, and weirdly applicable to animation and doing high characters. There was a facility for language, the English language, that does not exist anymore. English language has gotten very flat and very monotone and very atonal compared to what it was in the 30s and 40s, where people were bantering like ricochets, and the material was so smart. And so I always tell people, if you're an actor, you have to go backwards. You have to know whose shoulders you stand on. and where your art comes from. And so there's sort of a snobbery, like life started with the show Friends. No, it didn't. No, it did not.
Well, you have to know your history. You have to know your origins. So I very much agree with that, Charlie. Thank you for sharing that.
Okay, my pleasure.
Well, hey, Charlie, I know you played in another show of mine that was not mine, but a show that was a very big favorite of mine, Aladdin, the animated series. And you played Mechanicles, who was a mechanic. You remember him?
I do.
And
I enjoyed him. He was so insane.
He was.
Again, they just allowed me to go. They just allowed me to eat the scenery, and I love that. He was a buffet for me. He was so insane. I loved it. Loved that.
So, what was it like playing a mechanic who was also a clean freak?
Well, I never think in terms of anything like profession. I always think in terms of a personality. Okay. So all I knew is that he was so rigid and so compulsive and so fiery, and the writing sort of told me where to go with the scenes. It wasn't like, I was coming in blind. They were so well written. And when you're playing somebody who has a very tight sphincter, it really helps. It really informs you about how to play it. And I find people like that very funny. I find people who are persnickety and petty and small and neurotic, I find them hilarious. And so it's always fun for me to play people that I generally am so far from, where I either don't like them or I get to make fun of them. And he's a great composite for me of so many uptight, neurotic people that focus on the littlest minutia. So I think that's a redundancy. Littlest minutia. Minutia is the littlest. Okay, so I'm an idiot. So
you're not an idiot. Well, I know there is a certain bunny that you and I both enjoy, and how dear and near to you is Buster Bunny?
Very. It was a challenging run because of the stakes involved in being the first animated series with Steven Spielberg at the helm. But my relationship with the actors, and particularly Tress MacNeille, has just one of the greatest highlights of my life. Tress and I always say this to her. I go, Tressie, we could be at Dodger Stadium, come in at separate entrances, and with radar, we find each other in 30 seconds. We just have this language and this love for one another and this respect for one another that just over the years grows and grows and grows. And I just called her on her birthday in June, and it's like there's no time. I think when you have that kind of collaborative, and Cree Summer is as close to my heart as any living being she is, besides being unbelievably brilliant. We just have this rhythm of a friendship and a relationship. And, Robbie Paulson and Frank Welker and Kat Susi and Candy Milo and Danny Cooksey and Don Messick and Joe Alasky, who just passed, and I'm sure I'm missing other people, and forgive me, whoever's listening if I do. I'm just rattling off, and I'm driving to work, so I'm a little focused. The collaborative of the actors with some really brilliant writing was utterly thrilling. It was really an e-ride, really an e-ticket. For those of you who don't know, e-tickets were bought at Disneyland before they had the day pass, and they were considered the most expensive ticket because the ride was the most thrilling. And of course, they got rid of it 30 years ago. How the hell anybody else would know about that?
Hey, it's a piece of history, and if they want to know more, they can look it up.
Yeah.
In today's day and age with the computers.
Oh, my God, which I'm lousy at. I'm still trying to work my toaster, so don't ask me about computers.
Hey, man, everybody's at a different level on tech, believe me, so.
Well, I'm at the lowest level there is.
Well, Charlie, you've played on a lot of amazing shows. We've talked about several so far, but another one that is extremely popular to this day is Cow and Chicken, where you did play both the lead roles of Cow and Chicken. And I've heard your favorite character was Cow out of the two, and I was wondering why.
I want to correct you. I also played the red guy. I played all three of them. And I played Boneless Chicken, and I played Baboon and I Am Weasel. So that for me was a party. I just went to work and it was a damn party. I got to be five people, and the red guy still makes me laugh. And I think you just asked me why was Cal my favorite?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
I have this love for innocence in the face of terrible, because it's usually the innocence and the guilelessness of a character that irritates the living crap out of somebody trying to mess with you. And I loved her unbridled innocence and her joy, and she did not have not one bad cell in that 780-pound body. And I loved her. I just loved playing her. She cracked me up. David Fees is just remarkably brilliant. And weirdly, I'm going to go teach today with Chris Zimmerman, who directed it.
Oh wow!
And
Awesome.
we've been friends for 30 years. I met her in Hanna-Barbera. So anyway, we're all this community of carny folk, but I loved her. I loved her innocence, and it just cracked me up. Just always made me laugh. She was so simple and the most loving, with the biggest heart, and would fall apart over a fly, and that was pure joy for me. And I can't explain it any deeper than that, except it just got to me. Just got to me.
Well, you've played a lot of different characters, both good and evil, and you play MODOK on Avengers Assemble and Cobra Commander on the newer G.I. Joe animated shows that have come out recently. Do you prefer playing the villains or the heroes when you're in an animation role?
Well, I don't think of... This is a very good question. First of all, I don't think I've played many heroes.
I guess you could say good guys, like Spike and some of them. They aren't necessarily heroes, but good versus evil.
Good guys generally bore me. I prefer being naughty. I prefer being off. I prefer the off the beaten path kind of character. Although Tao was certainly one of pure goodness.
Yes.
So why not?
So Charlie, another favorite of mine that you've played on was SWAT Cats. What was it like playing on such an action-packed show and playing with Barry Gordon?
Well, first of all, Barry is one of the sweetest, most gentle, in total contrast to me. And so I think I think we understood each other, and I think he liked me as much as I liked him. But we're so different. We're so different. And he is he's a brilliant intellect and an amazing actor. I mean, I just saw him in a movie called Send in the Clowns with Jason Robards, where he was a kid, and he was utterly brilliant. He may have been 11 at the time. And he's been acting his whole life. He's wonderful. And just a sweet, sweet man. And, by contrast, I'm so goofy and bawdy, and, I have to mess around with everything. And he was very patient with me and very loving. And I learned a lot on that show. I mean, Gordon Hunt was the director at Hanna-Barbera. He's Helen Hunt's father. And he was a wonderful theater director for years, and I think still did, and did some live-action television. But he was my first director out here in L.A., and I think he's directed me in about 20, 25 series. I learned so much from him, but I also learned so much on the job in the room. I mean, going from Smurfs to SWAT Cats and beyond. I mean, I worked with everybody from Mel Blanc to Paul Winchell to Brenda Vaccaro, Brock Peters. I met on SWAT Cats. He became what I called my father until his death. Roddy McDowell. There were people that came and went that you sort of bond in this creative environment. People really sort of, I think because actors have to be so disarmed to be foolish, that there's not a lot of pretense or armor when you're, I call it, in the sandbox. And so being in the sandbox there, I learned so much from these other people, and they were so open and loving. And, Henry Gibson from Laughing, same thing. He became my brother until his death. There were so many wonderful experiences, and SWAT Cats was right up there with them because there was so much going on in the room. There was so much possibility. There was so much play. It was an amazing time, I have to say. And SWAT Cats was a surprise to me because it was not a genre up until that point. I mean, I think I had done Transformers by then and G.I. Joe, but this was a combination of action and comedy, and it wasn't just one thing, and that was fun. It was a blend of a learning curve for me. I got to be wry and smart-assy and a little bit funnier than, which was straight up action adventure in G.I. Joe and Transformers. So I liked that. That was a whole other thing for me as well.
You know, you mentioned briefly working with Mel Blanc, and was the first time that you worked with him, was it on The Good, the Bad, and the Huckleberry Hound show, or?
I think the first time I worked with him in a room was Captain Caveman and Son. He was Captain Caveman, and I was in Son. I was KV Jr. And by then, he was on oxygen. I think he had emphysema. And I loved him. I just, it was beyond thrilling, but what was the most fun for me is he would have the oxygen, and he'd say, "Come on, kid, let's go outside and have a cigarette." and I say, "Mel, you're going to blow us up. You're going to blow us up. Don't light it." And I think that they probably gave him the oxygen just to keep him from blowing somebody up. I don't know that he needed it or not, but he would he'd turn it off. He'd turn off the damn tank and have his dang cigarette and yak. He was lovely, man. He was really, he was a master. He was just a master. And I enjoyed him because he was a little guy like me and a New Yorker like me, and I just sort of felt very simpatico with his nature. Really good guy. Really good guy.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us, because I know Mel has been an inspiration to a lot of people who are in the industry of voiceover, and he's definitely become, you know, someone that, you know, as growing up, I've heard his voice and I knew who he was, but as I've done this show, I've really learned who he was, and he's just an amazing man who's touched my life, and I know he's touched millions of other people too.
Oh my God, there's nobody ever like him. I mean, I think he really created the bar that we all reach for. I mean, he played how many characters in one show?
Absolutely.
And
yeah.
That's just such an honor and a thrill to be able to have that opportunity, and then to work with somebody like him. It was amazing. Absolutely amazing.
You know, I have one final question for you today, and the question is, what is the legacy that you want to leave behind?
I never thought about even having a legacy. I think maybe framed by what I just said to you, I think a body of work is a lovely thing to leave behind, but I don't know that that's the definition necessarily of a legacy. I think maybe the relationships that I've cultivated and anything that I have done that is significant to changing anyone's life for the better, that to me has much more value than just my work. And don't get me wrong, my most beloved friends, many of them are gone, and I get to see them on TV and see them in movies and hear their voices and, you know, put in a Broadway show and hear them sing. And so they last. So I don't take lightly that my work hopefully will live way beyond me. And I kind of hope that for my work. But I also hope that equally so is my mark as a human, that I've left something of value to somebody, to many, 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 many people beyond that. So I don't know. I mean, a legacy is, I guess, an ongoing thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
I mean, the older I get, right?
Yeah,
right?
I totally agree with you. Yeah.
When the tally's in, let's see what's said.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure part of my legacy is pissing off quite a few people, which I think is a good thing. Listen, you cannot, I do not believe in my heart for any reason at all, or any way at all, that you can run for mayor. I am not running for office. And if you please everybody, I think you're an idiot. You have to have an opinion, and it can't always make everybody happy. And I think it's dangerous. So, you know, cautionary tale. Make sure you hold to whatever it is that you believe, and you will run the risk of annoying, enraging people, pissing people off, but that's life. And we're not in a popularity contest. If something is, you feel passionately about something and it comes from a deep place of conviction, you can't trade that. You can't abandon yourself or betray yourself to be popular. And that's a very important thing for me, because it speaks for me, which is I value maybe the most my own integrity. It is not always popular. Such is life. And I'm still here.
Well, absolutely, Charlie. You know, my dad always told me growing up that you can't please everybody and you just got to stick to your guns and go with it. So
I like your dad. I like him for that because today there's this great need to please, to be such a pleaser. Everybody's got to be so pleasing. And I think it's a great thing to aspire to. You don't want to hurt people. No one sets out to hurt people unless they're terrible people, but
absolutely,
of which there are a few in the world. But at the same time, you have to form a self. And you can't form a self if all you're doing is auditioning for the world and auditioning for relationships. And I say this all the time. I am not auditioning for my own relationship. I am not auditioning for the role of friend, son, whatever it is. I'm not auditioning for this. I have the part, and it doesn't always work for you, and ain't that life?
Yeah.
And that's hard, because sometimes it's a very isolating, lonely event. And tough.
Just go with it, man, you know?
Yep. So there you have it.
Absolutely, Charlie. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today, sir.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it, and it's a nice way to start a Saturday morning.
Well, I couldn't agree more, Charlie. This has been a fantastic start to my day, and I just can't thank you enough for giving me some of your valuable time to talk with you today. So, Charlie, do you have a way that people can reach out to you or contact you, social media, email, or any of that?
Well, I just got on Twitter, which was a shock to me because I resisted it for so long. But it's all lowercase letters. It's Charlie_Adler. It's at Charlie_Adler, all lowercase letters. And then I have a website which has a lot of my work and some of my work in the theater and commercial reels from 1970s, which are kind of funny. And that's the official CharlieAdler.com, I believe. But if you go to my Twitter account, the link will be there, or just go to the official CharlieAdler.com.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I did check out your website, and some of those older commercials are fascinating, man. The giant phone book and pencil, and those were amazing commercials, brother.
Isn't that hilarious? That's when I had brown hair and eyelids, by the way.
I know. I was like, who's this guy with hair?
Yeah, who the hell is that? I look like Greg Brady.
Charlie, thank you so much for being on the show today. It was a pleasure. Would you just close us out today as Buster Bunny?
Sure. This is Charlie Adler on Who Did That Voice, and
All righty, toasters. Have a good night.
Hey everyone, Christmas is right around the corner, and this December 18th, 2016, at midnight, we will be releasing the first annual Christmas special. It's a radio-style drama that I wrote and created just for you guys because this is my most favorite time of year, and I love radio dramas, so I took my two favorite things, combined them together to create something unique and special for you. Some of the actors on the show are previous guests, and some you've never heard before, but you soon will. Guys, I just hope this becomes a Christmas classic because I love it, and I think you will too. I hope it brings you some smiles, tears, and some holiday cheer. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year too. Well everyone, that's all the time we have for this episode. Join us this Tuesday for our next midweek special with Uncle Roy. He owns Antland Productions and does audio production and post-production for Broadway, off-Broadway, film and documentaries, music production and albums, music for film, animation, radio, and TV. And don't forget, he also does killer demos. Don't forget to check out Uncle Roy. You won't want to miss this episode.
Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next time for more discoveries on Who Did That Voice.